Let's talk about a few big injury concerns for this upcoming season next on Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. Welcome into FBT in 5. As always, make sure to follow and stream us on Spotify. Today is Wednesday, March 9th. I am Frank Stanfield, joined by Chris Towers, and we actually had Derek Rhoads on the full-length version of this podcast, and he broke down Charlie Morton, Chris, and not exactly what we wanted to hear. Obviously, Charlie Morton coming back from the broken fibula, and obviously you and me and Scott were all in on Charlie Morton, but he was a little bit more concerned. Does that have you concerned yourself about Charlie Morton?
A little bit, just because I think that the biggest thing with Charlie Morton is just the last time we heard from him was when he spoke to David O'Brien from The Athletic, and he said he's mostly caught up to where he would normally be at this point in the offseason. And so I guess the concern there would be that he's not all the way caught up. And, I guess our assumption is that because it's a broken bone, there wouldn't be too many lingering issues, but I guess it is a significant injury. It did require surgery. And so that's the kind of thing that, maybe it's not healing the way we hoped it would or the way the doctors hoped it would. But on the other hand, mostly caught up to where he would normally be at this point in the offseason. I feel like we see a lot of stuff like that from players, and it's all totally unquantifiable, right? It's not like, Charlie Morton's, he probably doesn't have a clicker for every pitch he's thrown in the offseason. He's like, well, I'm 150 pitches behind right now. It's more of a state of mind. It's a vibe. So hopefully it's nothing too concerning. And the fact that spring training has already been delayed and the start of the season has already been delayed as well puts Charlie Morton, whatever delay he might be dealing with, on pace to be ready when he needs to be. And so I'm still taking him in the 6th or 7th round. You can reach for him around early and still get him in the 6th round. So that's the nice thing about where he's going right now.
Like many pitchers, we're waiting on spring training to find out more information. I think Charlie Morton is just another one of those. If we see him like normal, velocity's there, he's pitching fine, nothing messed up with the mechanics in spring, then I think that we should be all systems go on Charlie Morton. The next two, Carlos Rodon and Pablo Lopez, they both dealt with shoulder injuries last year, but they also have a history of shoulder injuries. Carlos Rodon, the velocity on his fastball, while it was up for most of the year, it was way down over his final 4 starts. And then Pablo Lopez was on the IL with a right rotator cuff strain. Chris, they're both going between picks 100 and 125. What do you think about the risk factors for both Carlos Rodon and Pablo Lopez this season?
I haven't drafted much of either of them. I do think I prefer Rodon just because I think the upside's much higher. And the thing that's worrisome about that is that a lot of his breakout last season was tied to just how explosive and unhittable his fastball was. When he was throwing it, averaging 96 miles per hour with it, that was harder than we'd ever seen him throw dating back to college when he was, arguably the top prospect in the nation at the time. And the results on his fastball were just exceptional. He had a near 30% whiff rate with it. He had a 280 expected WOBA allowed. So guys weren't able to catch up to it, and they weren't able to do much with it when they were. And so it really looked like one of the best fastballs in baseball. If he doesn't have that 96 mile per hour velocity, even if he is healthy, then it starts to look a lot like the Carlos Rodon who was so frustrating and disappointing to start his career. A guy who had this big wipeout slider, but didn't really have anything else to go with it. Last season, the fastball gave him another elite pitch to go along with it. If it's not an elite pitch anymore, I think it's harder for Carlos Rodon to be a high-end pitcher. But that being said, when you're talking about Pablo Lopez, what you're talking about relative to Carlos Rodon is safety. And if the argument for a player is that he's a safer pick and he's missed time 3 straight years or 3 of the past 4 years with shoulder issues, including, I think 3 months last season, I think that's probably a reason not to draft a guy. Safety when you've got shoulder issues isn't really a thing.
Let's wrap up with Max Muncy, who is trying to return from a partially torn UCL, and he revealed earlier this week that rehab has been going well. He's been swinging a bat. Plan is to be ready for opening day, whenever that is, but he won't know for sure how his elbow reacts until he plays in live games. Chris, you have been the optimist on Max Muncy. What did you think about this report that we got earlier this week?
It's so hard to say just with anything with regards to Max Muncy. If he's healthy, he's a top 70 player. You know, he's one of the best hitters in baseball. And if you play in an OBP or a points league especially, he's just so good in those formats. But even in batting average, he's really, really good with the power he gives you. The problem is we don't have a lot of track record of position players dealing with this kind of injury. And in this case, what we have is a position player who has a torn UCL in his non-throwing arm. The comps that we have, like Shohei Ohtani played through a torn UCL in his rookie season. He tore it while pitching and was shut down for pitching, but continued to hit and won Rookie of the Year. He was awesome. He actually started running more after he suffered the injury. So it didn't really hurt him there. But that doesn't necessarily mean that it'll be the same thing with Max Muncy. And it doesn't necessarily mean that just because it's not his throwing arm, that it won't be something that he can't play through if he suffers a setback. So it's just, there's a lot of things going on there that we just don't know with Max Muncy. It's sort of uncharted territory as far as I can tell. That being said, I can get him outside of the top 100 or even cheaper than that. I'm going to take that risk with Max Muncy just because his track record is so strong that I don't really have much concern as long as he's healthy.
Yeah, the ADP for Max Muncy is 112 so far this offseason. For more extensive fantasy baseball coverage, listen to the Fantasy Baseball Today podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, your smart speakers, or anywhere else podcasts are found. And thanks for listening to Fantasy Baseball Today in 5. We'll be back again tomorrow morning. Bye-bye.